Welcome to our second session of Day 2, which is all about strategies and best practices for creating accessible work environments. Let me introduce the panel to you. We have Mike Park. Mike is an e-accessibility expert from MADA. For more than 15 years, Mike has been consulting with major institutions in Qatar and Canada on best practice in the e-accessibility. Prior to joining MADA, the Qatar Assistive Technology Centre, Mike worked with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind to ensure all major digital platforms in Canada were accessible to people with disabilities. Currently, Mike works as an e-accessibility expert with MADA and is spearheading national efforts in Qatar to ensure government websites and mobile apps in the country are designed and developed according to international e-accessibility standards. We have Ahmed Habib, policy expert with MADA. For over 10 years, Ahmed has been working with different organisations around the world to raise awareness about the importance of accessibility and the rights of people with disabilities. In 2009, he moved to Qatar to join and set up a team of MADA, a first of its kind centre dedicated to empowering people with disabilities to the world of ITC. Since then, he has worked on numerous national initiatives. Currently, he is a policy expert at MADA. And finally, we have Mohammed Al-Fahida, in the middle, Communications and Marketing Officer. Long before he graduated in Mass Communications from Qatar University, he has been actively smashing media stereotypes of people with disabilities. For many years, he was a young TV presenter on Qatar's national TV station, becoming the country's first blind presenter. As an advanced user of assistive technology for the blind, he has also created a vast set of resources to train others on the use of different tools. Currently, Mohammed is the Communications and Marketing Officer at MADA. I welcome the team and away we go.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We wish that we could present a good and simple and understandable session today. Here, our discussion today, me and my colleague Ahmed, will talk about a little bit about MADA, who are us and who is MADA and what is MADA, and the role of MADA. And my colleague Ahmed will talk about the disability and how to differentiate between the medical and the social model of disability, and also talk about the accessibility from both sides of accessibility. We'll talk about the physical disability, accessibility, and my colleague Mr. Mike Park will talk about the digital accessibility or the e-accessibility. First of all, what is MADA? MADA is an assistive technology center. MADA is a non-profit organization, and we are committed to connect persons with disabilities to the world of information and communication technology. MADA founded in the mid of 2010, and it's inspired by the United Nations Convention on the people and the rights of people with disability, and in the recognition that the technology is privacy across the world, and it's the technology is the accessing to the technology is there is a right to the people with disability. We are working to improve the digital inclusion for people with disabilities in Qatar. Our vision that all persons with disabilities in Qatar reaching their full potential. Sorry. through information and communication technology. And our message or our mission is to unlock and let the people with disabilities to take their full potential through the world of ICT, information and communication technology. Yeah. Now we'll talk about the difference between the assistive technology and the accessible technology. Assistive technology means the technology that the person with disability is using to access the technology. For example, as a blind user, I'm using the screen reader to access the website and the digital content and the mobile app, however it's an iPhone or iOS or Android. These systems have a built-in voiceover or screen reader that we can use to access the digital content. Now, the accessible technology means that these websites or digital content, it has to be accessible in order to reach or to get a benefit from it. For example, if the website itself is almost just a photo, I will not be use it as a blind. So here we have to make an accessible technology. And the accessible technology can benefit everyone. So our target now is to support 80% of the students with disability and give them their right to go in the or to contact to the mainstream education school by the end of 2018. Also, by the end of 2018, we have to support 25% of people with disability accessing the community. And this also means that the digital side of accessibility should be like it has to be the e-accessibility, the community. We have to raise their awareness about that. Also, the employment side, we have to allow and support 25% of persons with disability to access the employment and the workforce of TAR. So how can we reach these targetings? Our departments, we have departments at MADA, the Direct Services Department, which give the assessment, and after the assessment, persons with disability can get the assistive technology, however it's device or software, after the evaluation, and continuously we are following up with the people with disability to make sure that he can get a benefit from this assistive technology that he got. Also, we have the advisory and policy department, which helps to make policies for the digital accessibility, the accessibility, and some policies which helps as much as we can to make everything is accessible for the people with disability. Also, we are giving trainings to people with disability, and as our partnerships and relationship department, which I am working with, we have to raise the awareness during using the social media channels and the seminars, which make the accessibility and accessibility side more and more active from our society. Now we'll go to my colleague Ahmed, and he will present.
Okay. Thanks, Ahmed. I don't know if I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't know, I haven't really gotten the chance to meet all of you before. So we might be going over some fundamentals related to disability and accessibility, but it's just a good way of kind of like setting the context and laying the groundwork for our discussion about employment today. Obviously, most people think that people with disabilities constitute a small number of the population, when in fact over 15% of the world's population do have some form of disability. We also always try to start off our discussions by emphasizing the point, although it seems to be straightforward or commonsensical, but that all people with disabilities don't have the same needs. It's a good way of starting off a discussion around disability and accessibility. But before we even get into the nitty-gritty of kind of employment and the use of technology to create accessible work environments, this is a question we feel that if we're able to discuss and flesh out and answer, then we really are going to have a fundamental mind shift that will enable us to provide accessible services. And the question, of course, is what is disability, right? So many of us have worked with disability, but perhaps after this discussion, we might see that we've been looking at disability through a particular model. A textbook definition of a disability is what's on the screen behind me now, which is any loss or abnormality or of psychological or anatomical structure or function, any restriction or lack of ability to perform an activity, any disadvantage for a given individual resulting from impairment, right? So this is a definition that you would probably find if you were to look it up in a dictionary, or if you're to have it discussed in some sort of medical environment. Now, for us, for the purposes of our discussion, this is not a very good definition of what we want to see disability as, right? This shows us that disability is a series of deficiencies and inabilities. No person with a disability sees themselves this way, right? You're never going to meet someone who's blind that says, "Hi, my name's Ahmed, and I'm a loss or abnormality of psychological or anatomical function." No people with disabilities see themselves this way, right? People with disabilities see themselves as functional members of society, creatives, professionals, parents, mothers, fathers, and sisters. The way we should be looking at disability, of course, is that we should be looking at it through a social model. And what the social model says is actually the disability is caused by inaccessibility. And the disability is caused by the fact that the surrounding environment is not created in an accessible manner. And even though that's such a simple kind of, some people might say, you're just playing with words, it's pedantic, but really it does create such a fundamental mind shift in the way that we approach disability, and as such, it will really inform the way we provide services, whether it's in the workplace or at the stadiums we were looking at earlier, or yesterday the discussions that were happening around tourism. The reason why this model is so important is because, as the picture behind me shows, maybe 100 stairs going down or up from a subway station. If we were to go to this subway station, then obviously my disability would be a factor at that moment, right? We would be unable to continue our journey. We would have to stop and make changes to our plans, right? But in an accessible scenario, like this building in Vancouver, where there's a ramp that goes from the first to the second floor, then magically the disability disappears. The disability no longer plays a role or is no longer a factor in determining our user journey, where it is that we're going, and how we can conduct our business. Similarly, in this picture of an accessible bus in Ontario, again, by miracle, right, the disability disappears. Whereas in the medical model, if we were to look at disability as a medical condition, there is no amount of accessibility that can support a person with a disability, because the mindset will be conducive to an approach that is medical, meaning this person needs surgery, this person needs medication. Whereas us as service providers, whether it's in employment or otherwise, we need to be looking at disability through the social model. That says if we allow sign language in classrooms or instructional settings, then people who are deaf or hard of hearing are no longer considered disabled. This use of an electronic refreshable braille display enables someone who's blind to access digital content, thereby effectively getting rid of their disability. And of course, the possibilities are endless, right? With the right kind of support and with the right kind of infrastructure being built into the services that we provide, then disability can be eroded very simply. So if we look at disability through the social model, then all of a sudden we're going to begin seeing the kind of impact of the work that we're doing. Whereas the medical model, we're going to always see people with disability as sick and dependent and always in requirement of supervision, etc. So what's the point of building an accessible stadium? What's the point of building an accessible office, right? These people are sick, they need support, they need medical help, there's no way they can be functional, etc. So I hope that was a good introduction to kind of help us understand a bit more how we should contextualize disability. Similarly, when we talk about accessibility, we want to talk about accessibility within the realm of independent living. We always want to make sure that when we're talking about accessibility, we know that the ultimate goal is to allow people with a disability to have independent lives. Independent lives doesn't mean you no longer see your mother or your father and you don't answer their phone calls. It means not being dependent on them and being able to fulfill the choices that you want to make. And we know that within a Qatari context, the family plays a tremendous role in the lives of people with disabilities, but that does not mean that people with disabilities don't want to have independent lives as well. Within the context of employment, which we're going to discuss today, employment is so key at creating a situation where people with disabilities have independent lives. Breaking down social and economic barriers is a huge milestone for people with disabilities that continue to see themselves marginalized within all aspects of society. In order to achieve independent living, we need to look at creating accessible spaces. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I'm sure over the last 2 days, you're now all accessibility experts and can probably give the presentation better than I can. Again, the textbook definition for accessibility is really interesting as well. Easy to approach, reach, enter, speak with, or use. I like the last two ones, speak with or use, because it also highlights the human interaction element of disability as well. So it's not just good enough to create ramps and accessible design, and the speaker before me was speaking about that as well with regard to the stadia, but also it's about the human interaction as well. I'm not going to really bore you down with all the nitty-gritty of what constitutes accessible design, but many of us know that accessible design is a function of these following things, which are color, type, size, content, layout, digital, human interaction, and policies and regulations. The main takeaway message, which the previous speaker said as well, is accessible design is good design. This is always the main takeaway message. So now we have two takeaway messages from this presentation. One is that disability is caused by inaccessibility. And two is that accessibility is good design. Therefore, based on those two things, really, we shouldn't even be having this conference because we should be in a situation where good design trumps everything and all spaces and programs and services are accessible and people with disabilities are able to live equitable lives. But the reality of that, unfortunately, is very different. We always like to look at accessible design within the realm of universal design. We always like to kind of inform or discuss with people how universal design would benefit their day-to-day lives, whether it comes to print or whether it comes to the way you enter your office, whether it comes to the way you access multimedia, right? Closed captioning was exclusively a technology for the deaf, but now for anyone watching a Facebook video while I'm presenting, they're able to read what's happening on the video because it becomes such a pervasive technology. So accessible design is good for everyone, and accessible design also comes down to the kind of language you use and the accessibility of the language that you're using. This is kind of like the way we like to start our discussion before jumping into the context of employment. Always, we encourage people who are designing to design for the user and not to design for the aesthetic element or to design for a business goal or whatnot. And design, we don't see design as being limited to just AutoCAD or Photoshop or whatnot, but design is also event planning and policies and regulations. All of those fall within the realm of design. These are some examples of really great designs and implementations of universal design in Barcelona. Live captioning, which you're seeing on the screen as well now. And thank you to the people doing the live captioning. Print design, high contrast is something that Mike will speak about as well. And signage is something as well that can be designed in an accessible manner as well. And I'm sure all of you know about all of these different ways in which design can become accessible. I'm gonna hand over to my colleague Mike to discuss e-accessibility. But again, right, accessibility is so powerful. It's more powerful than the most potent of magic spells out there because it is the end of disability, right? So accessibility is so key in the sense that it is very, very powerful and it can in fact end disability. And once you do that as a service provider or as someone who's managing an event or a conference or an event, then you really hopefully start taking your responsibility much more seriously. And the thing is not working. Guys, the clicker is not working. Next slide.
You're pointing in the right direction there?
Yeah, sorry, we're having AV. Okay, now we're working. Usually I also speak about the way people with disabilities are portrayed as well. I know we're rushing a bit through the conference, through the session because we only have 1 hour. Usually people with disabilities are just seen as this, right? Even that sign is changing into something more lively. Usually people with disabilities are seen through the lens of their disability. The wheelchair becomes the person, right? The walking cane becomes the person. The disability becomes the person. Whereas we really need to start seeing people with disabilities as this, right? Or even as this. And once we have that mind shift regarding the way we look at disability, then that's when we can really improve the way that we provide those services. So Mike is gonna get on now to discuss e-accessibility.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. So basically, there's been a lot of talk about accessibility in the built environment, transportation, but what about the digital realm? That hasn't really been mentioned at the conference. So that's what I deal with in Qatar. Working for MADA, we have assistive technology, and then we have e-accessibility. E-accessibility includes websites, mobile applications, and more people with disabilities today are using the mobile device to access websites, services, information, and the list goes on. So e-accessibility means that when you build an interface designed for the mobile or computer platform, you want to make it universally accessible.
Just go to the next slide, Mike.
Yes, okay. Okay, there we go.
How about I do the slide thing for you?
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Then you can start talking.
So using the website as an example, if developers do not build websites with accessibility in mind, there's a good chance keyboard users, screen reader users will not be able to access information or valuable online services that more and more people are becoming reliant on. So again, e-accessibility works with universal design, right? Building one interface that everybody could use. And has anyone here ever heard of the international standards for web accessibility, WCAG 2.0? Well, that's the standard that we use, and that's what we specialize in.
Go ahead.
Next slide. Or?
That's it.
Oh, okay, we're there. Okay, so in terms of accessibility in the workplace, when we're dealing with information tech, MATA is an employer of people with disabilities, so we have to make accommodations, and we can share this information with all organizations in Qatar. In terms of IT, we need to look at the individual who's coming to work for us. We need to assess the type of disability and the type of assistive technology that this individual uses. We need to determine the proficiency of the assistive technology user, and in some cases, we've sent employees off to additional training. I'll give you an example. The Qatar Social Cultural Center for the Blind does a lot of training in assistive technologies, in particular the screen reading software. So there were instances where to meet the training requirements, we've sent employees off to receive additional training in the screen reading technology. And on the other half of that, we have to also do an assessment of how accessible digitally the workplace is. And that entails shadowing the employee or looking at the job description and seeing what the individual will access on a day-to-day basis. Person may be relying on a specific application running on a PC. We need to assess how accessible that particular software is, or whether it's a website application, intranet, it could be a simple PDF document. Just from experience, to accommodate people like people like Mohammed, we had to overhaul all of our fill-out forms in the workplace. Now, we all know that PDF documents, especially PDF forms, can be notoriously inaccessible. So we've taken on a project to ensure that it's keyboard accessible and that it's screen reader accessible, so that Mohammed could fill out these forms by himself and submit it to HR. And again, we're working in all areas of accessibility, not just the physical environment, but extensively in the digital area. And again, we have a project on the table that corrects these issues in the documentation. And there's also the staff around us, because we have people joining us all the time. And people come with zero to little awareness about accessibility. So we have to train people about document accessibility, how to prepare documents to be accessible. Because especially when you're sending an email to somebody, we need to ensure that images are described adequately, and that if you're directing a person with a disability to another website through an email, we need to ensure that it's accessible, so that all employees can carry out their functions and duties. And going to the next part here about consideration for digital accessibility. Again, we looked at websites, intranets, mobile applications, software for business applications, file management. We need to ensure that people working on our workplace can also find what they're looking for in terms of resources, and it's easily accessible in many different formats, whether it's PDF, Word, or PowerPoint. Spreadsheets, PDFs, PowerPoint presentations. Okay. Now I'm just going to give you some examples of how one could maybe make their workplace more accessible. And it usually starts with the simple document. And some of the considerations is color, typeface. You can go to the next slide if you want, Ahmed. And when we're dealing, when we're dealing with web pages and documents, we need to consider document structure. And if you use headings, it would be easier for someone using a screen reader to navigate within a document. And it's really, really important to use headings structure, list structure, paragraph structure, so that people using technology can easily navigate within information. Sometimes when we're dealing with documents, table of contents are very useful. And then we have alt text. Alt text, if you're using images, diagrams, schematics, if you embed them in documents and websites, they need to be described. There needs to be a text equivalent, because as an example, if a screen reader user comes across an image, it just simply says it's an image. And we need to describe it. And then there's color contrast as an example. There's a lot of people out there who are colorblind or just low vision, dyslexia. We work with standards to ensure, and we work with tools to ensure that all the documentation has adequate contrast. And according to the international standards, you need to meet a better than 4.5 to 1 or better color contrast ratio. What you're seeing right now is a good example of low contrast. And we do see this fundamentally in documentation, websites, mobile applications, and it doesn't just affect people with low vision, but again, just people with poor vision. Anyone who wears glasses, who tries to read print, especially tiny print with low contrast, you have to really take another look. Okay, the next one is, again, another one in this standard is do not use color alone to give instruction, to relay information, because it's not accessible using color. Because if you're colorblind, you're not going to be able to see, the color. So this particular checkpoint says that you should offer explanations, detailed text explanations, along with using colors, shapes, and sounds as needed. Okay, another example is use a font with distinguishable characters. In this example, the difference between Arial and Verdana, it shows, in Arial, it looks all the same. The I looks like an L in this case. And these are the two fonts that we actually recommend as accessible typefaces when it comes to documents and websites. Okay, we just talked about color contrast between foreground and background. Just make sure that there's adequate color contrast, good typeface, minimal use of styles. Again, we offer a 2-day hands-on workshop in this subject on document accessibility, starting with Word, PDF. We also offer a 2-day workshop on web accessibility. So for those of you that are interested, go on our website and look for the training link. And as part of our open training program, we invite anyone who's in Qatar to this workshop. Okay, that's good. I think we've covered a lot of things, Mohammed. Sorry, Ahmed, you can just go forward. Okay, the last thing is the international standards that we just talked about. The more common one that we work with is the WCAG 2.0. And in Qatar, there's an e-accessibility policy that states that we must comply to the WCAG standards 2.0, single A and double A. Single A is the highest priority, double A is the second highest priority, and then there's triple A, which ensures that all disabilities are covered and then some. And that would entail website owners to add additional, let's just say, widgets or applications to enhance and assist people even further with disabilities. But normally, we don't have to go that far.
Link app. Link Play Store.
الإنترنت المصرفي من الأشياء الجديدة والتقنيات اللي سهلت على الكثير من الناس الخدمات البنكية من التحويل وإنشاء الحسابات وغيرها.
Internet banking.
إنترنت بانكينج.
Register.
لما ندخل الريجستريشن بالإنترنت بانكينج.
Visit eBank log. Edit invalid entry required.
Required.
Edit protected invalid entry required.
Required. لكن إحنا بالنسبة لي كشخص أستخدم قارئ الشاشة ما أعرف إيش هذه الأشياء اللي هي required. مجرد حقول نص لا تعني أي شيء.
Edit protected invalid entry required. Edit invalid.
المواقع الإلكترونية تحتاج أن يتم إعادة تصميمها أو تعديل تصميمها بحيث تكون متوافقة مع قارئات الشاشة وتكون قابلة للنفاذ من قبل الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة.
The video actually came with a transcript with a PowerPoint slide. We do apologize. We should have put captions on it, but we thought transcripts would be the next best thing. But that video that you just saw right now is just a typical example of assistive technology user trying to fill out a simple form in a website. And again, this could be internally, this could be externally, it could be someone sitting at home trying to, access services. If the forms are not labeled correctly, a blind person just simply cannot fill these forms out. Okay, so we'll move on to the next video.
الآن راح أحاول سحب مبلغ من هذا الجهاز. من المفترض أن الكرسي يدخل تحت الجهاز مثل ما شايفين هنا ما في إمكانية للدخول، ولكن راح أحاول أيضا أن أعمل معه. الارتفاع لإدخال الكارت هو ممتاز، ولكن الأزرار الأخرى ما أقدر أوصلها. الفوق الأربع أزرار على كلا الجهتين ما أقدر أوصلها، ولكن بإمكاني الوصول إلى الزر هذا، ولكن ليس بإمكاني الدخول. هناك ATM تمكن الشخص اللي يستخدم كرسي متحرك أن يدخل تحت الجهاز عشان يكون على مستوى مناسب. شكرا.
So just to wrap it up, MATA offers a variety of services to the disability community and to the corporate community as well. So what we can offer you is audits, website audits, reviews of your technology, be it a website or mobile application, training, consultancy, and access to resources based on our website. We'll go to the next slide.
Thanks, Mikey. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Mike described in great detail a very good kind of introduction to e-accessibility. Sorry, I just have to check again. Can you hear me now? Yeah? All right, okay. So now we're going to kind of get to the core of our discussion. Again, we're going to have to go through it relatively quickly because of the short time that we've been allotted. But we want to talk to you a little bit about employment and best practices in employment. The first thing as an employer, the mindset you have to have, which goes back again to the social versus medical model, is that you need to understand that most jobs can be done by people with disabilities, right? So as an employer, if you don't have that mindset going into the employment process, then most likely it's going to be a very painful experience for your employees with disability. Secondly, you have to understand that it is by law that people with disabilities should have the right to employment in Qatar and in most countries around the world. The way that law is kind of brought to life or implemented vary from different state to state, but nonetheless, it is a law and certainly enshrined in the United Nations Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. When we're talking about employment of people with disabilities, the reason why we're discussing it is because there is a huge problem with the employment of people with disabilities in this part of the world. There are about 55 million people with disabilities in the Arab world, and 80% of them are of a working age, right? Yet the reality is that a very small percentage of that population are actually working. And an even smaller percentage of that are people that are actually working in meaningful jobs where they're just not employed to fill a quota, which happens a lot. There are some reasons that there are these issues with employing people with disabilities in the Arab world. And again, it's the medical versus social model, right? So if you go up to someone and you say, why doesn't your company have people with disabilities? What are they most likely going to say? How can the people with disability work? They can't do it. They're blind. They're deaf. They're in a wheelchair. The medical model, right? They're sick. I don't have enough staff to take care of them. How are they going to go to the bathroom? How are they going to drive, etc.? Whereas, if we look at it through a social model, we'll understand very quickly that if we have accessible education, if we have reasonable accommodation, if we have changes to infrastructure, if we reinterpret the definition of legal capacity, and if we change mind shifts and attitudes, then really people with disabilities will be able to be much more included in the modern day workforce. But the picture, to be very, very clear, is not only limited to the workplace, right? The basics are really missing in the Arab world, right? When it comes to education and training, we see a lot of students still being marginalized, students with disabilities. The physical environment is still very, very embryonic in terms of its accessibility. Transportation. To this day in Qatar, we have tremendous issues with transportation for people with disabilities, and the same thing applies to many countries in the Arab world. ICT, we're trying to do something about that in Meda, but still the problem is huge, right? How much of the television content that's being broadcast in the Arab world has audio description? The answer is 0. How much of it has sign language? Very little. And just facilities that are open to the public in general. The last one is really important, right? Social networks. Because how many people here got their job by knowing someone? Most of you, right? That's how you got your job. Most of you got your job not because you're not qualified, but most of you got your job because you know someone who recommended you, or you know someone who knows someone. The fact that these social networks aren't accessible to people with disabilities puts them at a huge disadvantage, right? Not being able to go out to the malls, to meet people, to go to restaurants, to engage with people in social activities, cultural activities, to go to the movie theater. These kind of things might seem trivial, but really this is how we make our connection, this is how we get jobs, this is how we meet life partners, how we get married, etc. So these social networks are very, very key as well. The government has a huge role to play in this, right? I mean, the primary onus is on the public sector. There's no doubt about that, right? We need to see more flexible working arrangements. We need to see more funding to employ people with disabilities, more subsidies for workplace accommodations. So if I'm a company, a small company, and I want to hire someone with a disability, but there's no ramp to get into the building, then the government should subsidize this or some kind of program. This is very common best practice around the world. We need legislation that's discrimination-based, right? So that employers are going to be afraid to discriminate against people with disabilities. I know it's not the best, most ideal way of doing it, but without this legislation, many of the things that our colleagues from the West discussed today would not be in place. And we see that, right? We see, for example, a fast food restaurant in Toronto or New York and London being accessible 100%. But the same fast food restaurant, when it comes to Qatar, is not accessible. Why? Because the legislation is weak, right? The enforcement is weak. Whereas people in the West, they're told, oh man, McDonald's, Burger King, they love people with disabilities, they're so accessible. The reality is they're forced to do this by law. People with disabilities had to fight for their rights, and legislation is very, very important as well. And we need to also just kind of understand that the private sector has a tremendous role to play in this as well, right? So the private sector, just because there's no law, doesn't mean they can say, oh, I don't care, there's no law, that's not my responsibility. No, in a lot of countries, private companies have started networks to employ people with disabilities. They share resources, they share experiences. They say, oh, Ahmed came to work for me yesterday. He's in a wheelchair, but my bathroom is not accessible. What do I do? What have you done in your company? I have a blind employee, and I want to enable them to use HR forms to apply for leave, apply for grants. How did you do it in your company? These kind of networks are very, very key in the private sector. And then there's the mixed sector. In Spain, there's an excellent example called Once Fundación, where they've created huge businesses that are mandated to be mostly filled by people with disabilities. So there's a huge, huge business, for example, that does laundry in Barcelona and Madrid. And most of the people that work there are people with disabilities. And that's their social mandate, that they employ people with disabilities. That would be something cool to see happen here in Qatar as well. There's a long list of things that we can do as employees, right? The most important thing for me is the mind shift and having a champion in your organization, right? We in Qatar lack laws, lack an accessible infrastructure, but hopefully if there is someone in the organization who was a champion for employing people with disabilities, there could be some movement in that area as well. You want to review your recruitment process, right? It's not only about when the person gets the job, it's how the person is finding out about the job. Can they interview for the job? Are they, are they being afforded equal opportunity to apply for the job? Training your staff, So if someone who's deaf joins your office, most likely than not, your staff have no idea what to do, right? Should they yell at the person? You know what I mean? Should they write everything down? Is the person stupid? Can the person read or write? These are questions that need to be addressed when you introduce people with disabilities to your workplace. There has to be some kind of reasonable accommodation strategy as well. So if I join Qatar Foundation and I say, listen, the only way I can work in this position is if I leave 1 hour early, or if I need a car, or if I need a bigger bathroom, then there has to be a formal process where this request can be made. It shouldn't be like a wasta, please, can you hook me up kind of model, right? You have to have a situation where there's a formal way in which someone with a disability can make a request for reasonable accommodation. So these are, what we've done at MEDA is we've published a really cool guide about employment for people with disabilities, which we can make available to you in Arabic and English, which summarizes, or rather goes in greater detail into what all of these points say. Another really cool thing that happens around the world is the ability to keep things simple for people with disabilities, right? Where, as a person with a disability in Qatar now, today, can I go somewhere as a one-stop shop and understand my rights, understand my resources, understand which employees are really good at hiring people with disabilities in one central location. That place doesn't exist, right? In many other countries, it does. We also need to coordinate our efforts in terms of employing people with disabilities. So some companies here in Qatar do a very good job of employing people with disabilities. So for example, the Ministry of Interior employs a lot of people with disabilities. Qatar Airways employs a lot of people with disabilities, but these areas need to be coordinated. One last point, I know I have 1 minute left. A lot of people say the solution is telework. Everyone knows what telework is, working from home, right? You have to be careful with working from home, because are you just telling the person with a disability to work from home because you don't want to make your space accessible? Because if that's the reason, then that's not a good solution for telework, right? But if you're telling the person with a disability, I'm flexible, you can work from home on some days, but you're more than welcome to come into the office, that's an entirely separate thing. People with disabilities are the future of the workplace, right? Future workplaces want to include people with different experiences, different abilities, different skills. So I hope that we don't get left behind. And we always ask this question, who cares, right? For Mohammed Lifheda and myself, as people with disabilities, having the opportunity to work has been life-changing for us, right? It's enabled us to break stereotypes. It's enabled us to smash economic barriers, financial barriers, and social barriers. So all these things are really, really important. It's not just a job for a person with a disability. It can be something that's very life-changing. I think we're out of time. Is that correct? Yes. So are there questions now, or we have capped? We've taken over. Thank you.
I am conscious that we are running late at the moment, and is there any really burning single question that someone wants to ask that otherwise we can continue over lunch? We've got one question at the front.
Microphone.
My name is Abdullah Abdulaziz. I'm a responsible tourism activist. I'm interested very much in accessible tourism. And what you have mentioned is really, really thrilling to me. And it's added value to my knowledge. And I wanted just to pass a message rather than a question. There are opportunities real opportunities to make changes in accessible, make places, workplaces accessible. There are companies who have large budgets of CSR, and they tend to do every year same beach cleaning for 1 hour and that's it. And instead of doing that, I think they need to shift their budgets toward creating and making those workplaces accessible, and that to help out in collaboration with other entities, with government and other stakeholders, in order to integrate people with persons with disabilities into the workplace. And that's one of the ways where civilized organizations do that. I wouldn't call the countries, but it's like an organization that they hold lots of money.
Yeah,
and that's
sorry, just to add to that point, right? So we have to be careful not to see accessibility as CSR, because then it's going to be like the charity model, right? So we want to make sure that accessibility is baked into the policy of the organization. Just like the policy says you can take 10 days of leave, the policy should say the building should be accessible. But I agree with you that there's a lot of resources and a lot
No, I
of
understand that. I'm not saying that to be considered as a charity. I'm saying that this is one source of fund that could be
Yeah.
utilized to integrate people like yourselves, and then you become normal like myself and yourself, that we work together side by side, rather than being isolated, and to be
Right.
included socially. So a trainer staff is another model to pay for MEDA. The company should pay them to MEDA to train my staff. So
So just again, we're we don't accept any money, but we definitely come and train your staff for free. So if that's what you want us to do, then we can do that. And like Mike said, we also run audits on websites, mobile apps, document accessibility. We do everything for free to Qataris and non-Qataris. It's a great initiative here.
Great.
And Qatar, we also offer technology to people with disabilities, all for free. So if you know anyone, any of your family, your friends, your colleagues, if they can come to MEDA, they get assessed by a team of experts, they get provided technology. It's a really remarkable initiative. It's one of the few initiatives around the world that has such an encompassing scope of work and an encompassing mandate. I think there's a question in the back. No? Oh, okay. Yeah, right there. Hola. Thank you.
Mine is an observation more than a question. During this conference, the focus was on physical disability, and this has been mentioned before, but also visual disability. But some disability was overlooked or disregarded in this context, which is deafness. MEDA, you do your job, and you do the extra, you go the extra step, and you actually do captioning for all your clips that are in Arabic, and some of them are even in sign language and everything like that. But the other clips that we have seen during this conference did not have any captioning whatsoever in Arabic or in English for the audiences. We had a sign language interpreter, and I can see, because we don't have deaf audiences today, that he stopped translating after the first session. And but also we have the live captioning here that's in English, but most deaf people in the Arab world do not read English. We need captioning in Arabic. And that's another thing. When it comes to employment, this is the comment that I always encounter when I'm dealing with deaf people is everybody treats us as if we know everything and know how to read easily, which is the first basic issue that they have, which is reading. The reading possibilities and the capabilities of deaf people is very limited in the Arab world, especially. It's limited all over, but especially in the Arab world. They say that we are ignored in our offices, in our employment agencies. We are always ignored and left alone to do whatever we do. We don't actually have a specific job, and if we do have a specific job, which is data entry, and there is no way we can improve our capabilities or take further courses to further our careers. I have a lot of deaf friends that come to me and say, I want to go to this specific course or something like that, but it's in English, and if it's in Arabic, there is nobody to translate it for me. I do not know what to do, how to improve that. I don't know if this is something MEDA can improve or not, or this is something anybody can work on, but they all want to improve themselves, but they don't have the opportunities to improve themselves. And they are always, and this is not the first conference, they are always overlooked.
Yes.
somebody is actually talking on behalf of them when they should be the ones that are actually doing the talking.
Right. So with regards to the general marginalization of deaf people are definitely much more marginalized than other disabilities around the world and in the Arab world in particular, as my friend mentioned, because of low literacy levels. What we're doing at MEDA now is we're trying to build a more comprehensive employment program that would utilize employment experts, that would provide job counseling and job accommodation for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. But if you remember in my slide in the beginning, one of the slides said that we really are missing the basics, right? And unless these basics are in place, it's going to be difficult to see the full inclusion of people with hearing disabilities. And I think that you're absolutely right. I would love to see more deaf people on the stage for them to discuss kind of what it is that they're doing. I think deaf people are silenced in a lot of the discussions that we have. So I'm sure next year, hopefully we'll have more deaf people on the stage. And in the meantime, I know that a lot of good work is happening here in Qatar at Hamad bin Khalifa University with captioning and audio description for the blind. So a lot of good things are happening in the country, but just not fast enough and not really building on each other's success. It kind of seems sometimes that we're having the same conversations over and over again. So hopefully this will be the last time I speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we can leave it there and take the questions over lunch, I'm just conscious we have one final session to get through and we're running over time at the moment. Please thank the panel. That was a very information-packed session.
Thanks for coming.
And if Mornay and Nabil could make their way to the stage for the next session.